Welcome back. So it's been quite a while, and a lot has happened. I haven't had time to record in the longest time while I've been planning to record some stuff. I just haven't had the time to get around to it. So let's begin. This episode is going to be about One Piece, the most recent chapter and everything before this chapter, and some of my ideas surrounding certain characters, specifically Loki, and his father. I believe his name is Harald. So, I believe that there is enough now within the series to definitively say, well, I say definitively, I could be completely wrong on everything I'm about to say. But I believe it makes narrative sense what I'm about to say, and it makes just, I don't know, story-wise sense what I'm about to say with everything that has been laid down so far. So, for the character of Loki, there has been a lot of discussion on whether this is a good character or a bad character, if they will be the antagonist of this current arc. Because almost every arc, we basically have an antagonist, somebody for Luffy, the crew, to fight against, and somebody whose ideology clashes with Luffy or is oppressing people, and Luffy steps up to free those people, whether he intends to necessarily free people or not, or he's just fulfilling a promise. Like, in every single case, it's basically a promise to one of the citizens of that country that he is here to help them with whatever desire they strongly have, especially when they show courage and strength and reach out in such a way that he believes they are also willing to fight for what they believe in and for that freedom. And we've had examples dating back all the way to the very beginning. Kobe was the very first individual to have that kind of drive and desire, and Luffy was not going to help him unless he was willing to stand up for himself and also fight. Now, he knew that Kobe wasn't necessarily strong and would have probably lost in a one-on-one combat situation, but at that point Luffy steps in and does the heroing job. But let's focus more so on Loki and the situation now. In my mind, when Loki was first introduced, he really did look like a bad guy. Like, why would a good guy be chained up like this? Why would a good guy be, you know, everybody continues to say that he's like the first prince, he's killed his father, he's the worst thing to happen to Elbaf. I don't remember if they specifically said he's the worst thing to happen to Elbaf, but basically it's implied by everything they've been saying about him, especially when he was first introduced. At least when he was first introduced to us in terms of seeing him on screen and not necessarily seeing a silhouette of an individual who looked like a kind individual and was in love and tried to propose to someone. That Loki, that particular individual, did not look like a bad guy. It looked like they might be an ally. It looked like they were young, and sure, they got rejected, but it didn't look like they were necessarily a bad person. So, I guess I'll talk a little bit about that particular Loki and this particular Loki, because something that gets brought up a lot, I think, or at least that I've seen, is that that Loki was rejected by someone who, when we were introduced to them, and when we got the flashback of them rejecting Loki, is someone who is looking for somebody to marry them, and was willing to marry almost anybody. So, what could have possibly made them feel like Loki is not worth marrying, or that Loki is not, husband material, if this person was desperately looking for a husband, for someone to marry, and Loki, being the crowned prince of a country, future probably king of that country, or at the very least, he'll continue to be a prince of some sort, even if somebody else became king. Why would you have rejected somebody like that? if they are, like, deep down a good person. And I think also we have a situation where it's a little bit more complicated if you look at it from her point of view. And I believe it was Lola was the character, but from her point of view, if she did actually like Loki, a very strong reason for her to reject that particular marriage is because it was set up by her mother, and her mother just wants power and to have the giants as part of her family. And maybe the rejection of Loki was more so a political move, so to speak, in order to not only slight her mother, but also ensure that her mother's crew doesn't have the loyalty of extremely strong beings, the giants, on their side. It could have been a situation like that. Now, I'm not saying it necessarily was. Maybe there was something that was off about Loki, but one of the biggest counter arguments to Loki being a bad guy is Luffy's first interaction with him, seemingly like he is a good guy deep down, because we do know that Luffy has a very good judge of character, and I would assume that it's something hockey related. I would assume, just like Mihawk said, that Loki has this way of drawing people towards him and rallying people to his side. I would suspect that he also has a way of discerning whether somebody is a good guy or a bad guy. And I feel like in those panels where we see Luffy interacting with Loki, even though we also see Loki's thought bubble, and this is important as a counter argument to him being a good guy, or, a counter argument to him being a good guy, is that he was thinking he wanted to kill Luffy once he was set free, and not necessarily fulfill any promise he gave to Luffy. But I'll come back to that in a minute. What I'm thinking is, Lola's whole position is fully based on the ramifications of her actually being engaged and or marrying Loki. And I think it doesn't necessarily need to do anything with the character of Loki, if he's a good person, if he's a bad person, if at that time he even had a notion of destroying the world, which I'm betting he didn't, and if he had even shared any of that with her at that time. It is a very odd panel and scene and situation where, he's trying to give her the flower, and it looks like he was rejected right then and there. I would assume that for a marriage proposal like this, they would have both met at least a few times before necessarily deciding to go forward with a marriage. I know from the point of view of Big Ma, it would seem like he would want this to happen as fast as possible, pushing the two of them. And that could have negatively affected the way that Lola sees Loki. Almost like he's really pushing for this, her mother's really pushing for this, and she doesn't want that pressure and that push, especially from somebody like her mother. But we'll leave that aside, and we'll go back to Luffy's reaction to Loki. So, I feel as though, with all of the characters that we've seen so far, that from our point of view, from the reader's point of view, and even from the point of view of various characters within the series, they seemed to be not necessarily good guys, but then they turned out to be the strongest allies and completely changed the way we viewed them when they were first introduced. Or if we had already believed they were necessarily a good guy, they were painted as a bad guy in universe by a lot of the other people. But then once we actually get to see them and who they truly are, we find out that they're not actually that bad guy. So I want to say that I have an explanation for all of the seeming inconsistencies with how Loki seems to be. And I want to say that if this turns out to be true, it would make a lot of sense. at least in my mind, and you guys could leave in the comment section or decide for yourselves whether you think this is necessarily accurate, if this makes sense to you, or if this makes sense with respect to the story. But getting back to Loki's thought bubble, where he is like, once Luffy frees me, I'm just gonna straight kill him. I'm not entirely sure it's meant to be read that way. In my mind, it more so seems like Loki is thinking like he's frustrated. He doesn't necessarily trust other pirates. Luffy is a pretty big name pirate. And from his point of view, it could be one of two possible options. I can't trust pirates. They're not necessarily good. Why are they on this island? I'm going to kill this guy once he releases me because I just can't trust him. Or he's playfully saying, I'm going to kill you. Like he's angry, but he's not necessarily angry at Luffy. He's just angry in general. And he's like, yeah, I'm just going to take it out on you. I'm going to kill you. But not really. Haha, it's just a joke. It's just a negative thought that crept in, and we just happened to see that negative thought. That sort of thing. But beyond all of that, I do have a better explanation, I think, than anything I've seen anywhere else, explaining the Harald situation, the Loki situation, and why Loki is perceived as a bad character. And it also, I believe, explains the Loki killing his father, assuming that was completely true, or assuming that was completely false. So, what I feel like may have happened, because I do feel like Loki didn't actually kill his father, I feel like the whole situation, and I know I've seen this before, had been pinned on him, where it looked like he was taking the fall for killing his father when somebody else actually killed him. So my idea goes like this. Elbaf is a country that's completely isolated. It has no connections to the outside world, not really. Not really any major connections. It's not affiliated with the world government. And it's a very warrior-heavy culture, where it very much looked like, from the day you're born to the day you die, you will be a warrior through and through. You will learn to fight at an early age. You will learn to be a warrior, and your main goal and ambition is to be part of the giant crew, to be part of the main people defending the sovereignty of Elbaf. Now, I'd want to say that the reason that Loki's father, Harald, wanted to make Elbaf into a country like this is because he saw potential in trading with the outside. Not necessarily pillaging and plundering like they may have done before, but in order to have actual trade relations. There are resources on Elbaf that others would want, and there are resources outside of Elbaf that Elbaf might want. So opening up those negotiations, opening up trade, opening up friendliness to other nations, that would be seen as a good thing. Now, I doubt that Harald wanted to completely eradicate all of their warriors. I'm sure he still wanted some sort of military force to exist in case anybody gets the idea to invade or take advantage of them. But it almost seems like instead of, he wanted more peace for his people so that not everybody has to grow up being a warrior. Because all other nations, they don't work like that, as far as we've seen. There is a military presence, whether it's the Marines or whether it's their own country-based army. We know that that system exists to protect those countries. And he might have been thinking, we don't need every single citizen to be able to defend the country. We only need a handful of people to be able to defend the country. There aren't many threats that could get by just the giant crew or the new giant crew. They don't really need every single person to just train and become a warrior. It's important to have some people become warriors, but not everybody. So I'm thinking he was slowly trying to change Elbaf into a country like the other countries and give the people more freedom. And I think Loki, at a young age, was backing that plan. And I think he truly actually believed in that plan and wanted people to be free and to be happy and not have to fight and not have to learn to fight and not duel over which fish is longer, duel to death, not have to have that sort of culture imprinted on them from birth. And that's all good things. I also feel like Loki at a young age, when we get to see flashbacks of him being mischievous from this particular chapter, I have a feeling that's meant to remind us of the Odin situation, where Odin seemed to be a bad guy from the point of view of everybody else. And I mean, he was doing somewhat terrible things, but his heart was in the right place. He was trying to do good things, other than stealing the wives. I don't know about that one. But beyond that, Loki didn't seem to steal any wives. He played pranks, according to them, setting places on fire. That might have just, like, Odin flooded a place, right? I'm pretty sure that was an incident that Odin had done. And Loki setting fire to a place. That could have straight up just been an accident. When we hear that Loki brought in the wild beasts into the village, I have a feeling that because not a lot of people wanted to be friends with him, and number one, he's royalty, and number two, he's incredibly strong. So a lot of people that would tell their children, avoid this guy. You can't mess with royalty because he's like a crown prince. And, he's incredibly strong, so he might hurt you, so everybody just basically stays away from him. And they also have, in very recent memory, the situation with Big Ma, where everybody tried to be friends with her, and not only did she end up eating a whole bunch of them, but she ended up throwing a tantrum and, destroying everybody. If Loki was that kind of strong back when he was a child, they would have remembered how Big Ma was acting and how all of that played out, and they would be like, okay, let's just stay away from him so a situation like that doesn't happen again. So he wanders into the forest on the lowest level and befriends a whole bunch of these beasts and animals. And in his mind, and he's a child at this point, but in his mind, they're living in the frigid cold. They're not, in a good environment. They're hungry, they're cold. Why don't I just bring them into the village, show everybody that they're nice and they're tameable and they're, not a threat, and everybody will just accept them, like a child would think that. So he would just bring his friends, these are his friends, over to meet all the people in the village and have them accept these various creatures. Like, I think that's a perfectly fine explanation for why Loki acted that way. The fire I can't easily, explain away, because you'll have to see more of that backstory and exactly how that happened. But I do feel like, even though it's trying to paint him from the point of view of all these other people as a bad guy, there are good explanations for all of his actions and why they might not necessarily be that of a bad guy, especially since he was a child at this time. And since he lost his mom at a very early age, is his father really in a position to take care of him, like properly take care of him, running a country? I don't think so. So I think it's a situation like that, where maybe he was acting out a little bit, maybe he was being genuinely a good person and trying to do things that will help people, but it was completely, it went wrong. It simply just went wrong. But continuing with my idea and the story that I'm trying to tell, with Harald wanting to open up negotiations with the rest of the world, I have a feeling he reached out directly to the world government. And he's like, okay, Elbaf has been very close border for the longest time. And we want to open up our borders to everybody else. So the best way to do that is through the world government. He may or may not have known how evil the world government is, but it may not have mattered either way, because he would have felt that they would be able to reach some sort of agreement, and it would benefit both sides. So I expect we will see in a flashback him negotiating with the world government, and it might be painted as a bad way, but I have a feeling it was purely for the good of Elbaf, and even for the good of the rest of the world. Building bridges, and opening up trade routes and resources, and being able to import as well as export. I think all of that was on his mind, and I think the peace of his citizens was on his mind, and that's why he wanted to do something like that. And when he opened up the doors to these people, the world government, in all likelihood, either the five elders or some celestials below them. I have a feeling that that's when they set up the summoning circle within his castle. And that's the moment when everything would have started to go downhill. I know some people have been saying, like, what if he was influenced by Big Ma, or what if he was influenced by the world government through Caramel? I don't believe that that's the case. I want to say that he was genuine and true to what he wanted to do throughout the entire ordeal, but I have a feeling that at some point the world government demanded stuff of him that he was unwilling to fulfill on, and that's when they sent somebody in to kill him, and Loki just happened to be there. And in the heat of the moment, I have a feeling that Harald was killed while Loki was trying to save him, but from the people that were witnesses at that time, they didn't realize that that's what happened. They didn't realize that Loki was actually trying to protect his father, and that whoever from the world government was the one to actually kill him. And they only saw Loki killing his father. And then we know that, I believe is Jarl, or Jarul, the oldest giant. We know that he has that sword stuck in his head because he was trying to stop Loki. I want to say that a really good explanation for that is Loki, enraged by his father's death, wanted to immediately lash out and go find the world government and whoever's responsible for this and destroy the world. Like, I could imagine a scene playing out like that, where he's screaming and he's crying and he's lashing out and he just wants to go and destroy them. And Jarul had to stop him from leaving Wano in order to protect him, because he doesn't want Loki to all of a sudden start a war with the world government. And that's where he gets that sword stuck in his head. And if this is the case, it explains where the summoning circle comes from. It explains how they were able to summon into there. It explains how Harald dies. And it also explains why Loki is a good person deep down, but everybody views him as a terrible person. And it's the rumor had spread from whoever was there at that time that Loki had killed his own father to steal the devil fruit. No, his father was killed in front of him. He was trying to protect his father, and he grabs the devil fruit in order to be able to fight them. And it would also explain why the person on the phone believes he's a good person, because they may have actually known the truth behind the story. And I have a feeling there are other giants who actually know the truth behind the story, but they need to keep it under wraps, because if they don't, the entire nation of giants would go out and wage war with the rest of the world, which is not good and not in line with what Harald wanted. I also believe that this explains Loki's weird, I guess, line to the person on the phone, where he's like, if I was there, I wouldn't have been so kind, I would have killed them or whatever, because he's seen that betrayal that happened in front of him by the world government against his father, right in front of him, right in front of his face. He had lost trust in the rest of the world. And when he says he wants to burn down the world, he wants to burn down the world government, which is basically the world in his mind. Like, they control almost everything. He's waging war against them because of what they did. So, I have a feeling that we will see some of that in, like, later chapters. I don't think it'll be anytime soon. Like, maybe in 2, 3, 4 chapters, something like that, where we'll actually see a proper flashback. But things have been moving rapidly, and Luffy, Nami, Zoro, they're all headed basically right to where Loki is. And basically right to where the two God Knights are. And if that confrontation happens either next chapter or the chapter after that, we might actually get some legitimate answers, like, real quick, and see some flashbacks, like, right away. But I have a feeling before all of that happens, we'll probably have to see what happened to Big Ma. If she survived, if she died. Same with Kaido. But, those could be completely up in the air. We may never see them again. And we may never know if they've actually passed away or if they're still alive. But we also have Kid, we also have Law, Beppo swimming Law somewhere, we have to eventually flash to that. It would be a good point in time soon to flash to that, and then come back to the current story and progress, because there has been a lot of stuff happening recently. Introduced to a whole bunch of giants, the party has started, we got to see Saul again, which happened much quicker than I even could have hoped for. We got to see the library. We didn't get to see any of the books really in the library or get to read any of them, but that's fine. We also got to see the oldest living giant. We got to see Loki already. It was a big one. We got to see a little bit of the frost layer, the hell layer of Elbaf, and we got to see some of the sun layer to Elbaf. Eventually we'll get to see the heaven layer, or the very top layer. We also got to see some motivations from Loki. We know there are characters in the background where there's somebody waiting for something on Elbaf, whether it's Skopper Gaban or whether it's whoever they might be. I don't know, Shiki. It can't be Shiki. He has a steering wheel in his head. It can't be Shiki. Even if the cloak kind of looks similar, I know that the yellow from the hair is not, like, legit. That was colored in by just people who have no knowledge necessarily of what the hair color is actually supposed to be. So if it's not actually supposed to be golden or yellow, then it's probably not Shiki. But even if it is, it's probably not Shiki anyways, because of the, steering wheel in his head. And this individual looking like they're wearing a traditional hat, like Wano style. And it doesn't really seem like, there's a steering wheel up in there. But either way, I think that this idea kind of makes a lot of sense, and at this late in the game, I don't necessarily know if we're going to be able to deal with anything greater than the world government is the enemy, because it just feels like that's what this is all built up to. In Egghead Island, we not only got to see one of the Elder Stars, we got to see all of them in their final forms. So, it really, really quickly ramped everything up to being like, this is the final boss. These are the final bosses. We are here. We're at this stage. Like, forget the admirals. Forget everybody else. This is the stage that we're at. So painting the world government even further as the bad guy, as now the protagonist in every country's story, as now the protagonist of the entire world. I mean antagonist. Antagonist, not protagonist. They're the bad guys of everybody's story. And we'll get to see, I assume, at least in this final arc, in this final push towards the end, all of the things that Dragon has been doing to combat them, because from Dragon's point of view, these guys are the enemies of the world. These guys are the enemies of freedom. He's been fighting them specifically this entire time. But from Loki's point of view, every single island he's been going to, it's kind of been, here's a bad guy, we'll need to deal with that bad guy. A lot of the islands, though, the bad guys were Marines. A lot of the islands, it was technically the world government that we're fighting against, but more so the Marines, where there are corrupt Marines here, there are corrupt Marines there. There are the 7 warlords that we had to take on. So, and of course, those were sanctioned by the government to be able to act the way that they do, and are given orders and have to fulfill those orders. Though not necessarily, we didn't necessarily need to take them down because of the orders they were fulfilling, but it's because, they were skirting the laws and going around everything and doing terrible things in the background. But I feel like for Elbaf specifically, we don't necessarily need to have one bad guy character that's kind of like, we'll take care of them and then we'll move on. It's more so, I think, we'll set up a lot more with the world government and how they're the bad guys. And that's more evident with now, we have Loki, yes, chained up, but 2 members of the Holy Knights just showed up. Like, they're clearly the real bad guys. So I do expect to see Loki being redeemed as a good guy, to see a flashback either in 3 chapters, 4 chapters, something like that, showing the situation that happened in the past and having to face off against these Celestials. I don't even know if they're Celestials, to be fair. If they're saying, oh, Loki's fine enough to join our ranks, then the God's Knights or the Holy Knights, they don't need to be Celestials to be that, potentially. I feel like they could just be random, regular people. Like, it is possible that they just have a whole bunch of regular people serving as God's Knights, and maybe also have, royalty serving as God Knights. But I mean, Loki is a royalty, so he's at least not like a random commoner. And if this character that kind of looks like Shanks, and it's probably not Shanks, is the son of Mr. Moonman, Garling, then it would make sense that he's part, or at least maybe he has ascended to the leader of the Holy Knights, because we know that Garling was the king of the God Valley location, that island, that kingdom, whatever it might have been called. So he has a good standing at least. And after all the incidents that happened on that island, it looks like Garling was one of the Holy Knights already, and likely got quite a big promotion after everything had happened. And maybe he had become leader at that point, because it's not at all his fault, all the terrible things that happened, all the stuff that was stolen, all the different factions that were fighting, but he made it out of that fight. He made it out of that fight alive. And he probably fought with everything he had against all of the strongest people, and that was probably recognized. And I have a feeling that around that time, he was made the leader of the Holy Knights, if he hadn't already had been. But he also seemed like an individual with high standings already, being the king of that area, and whether he was a Celestial that was king of that area, or he was below them as just a regular king, it looks like they acknowledged him enough to promote him to one of them, for the most part, and as one of the leaders, or if not one of, but the leader of the Holy Knights at some point. Like, his accomplishments must be quite big to be able to take up that position. So in all likelihood, the previous leader of the Holy Knights would have, I would assume, gotten killed on God Valley, and Garling showed his true strength during that time, and then got promoted to the leader of the Holy Knights. But all of that is to say that it may not matter whether you're a commoner or royalty or directly descended from one of the Celestials. You might just simply be able to ascend to one of their ranks, or you might have to actually be royalty. You might have to actually have royal blood in you. Even if you're just a commoner king, as long as you have that title, you're able to ascend to a Holy Knight if they deem you worthy enough. But it was probably Garling's idea to recruit this individual, because they're clearly strong, they're clearly somebody that is a prince, of royal blood, and of course they're a giant. You have the giants in your back pocket if you manage to get him to agree. So I think that it makes a lot of sense if that's what they've been trying to do. And it also would make sense that if the negotiations with the previous king, with Harald, were something like, okay, we'll help you integrate into the world government, but you need to send your strongest warriors to us, and we'll be in charge of them, and whatever resources we want, we can have, and then that'll give you a seat as one of the world government affiliated countries. And I have a feeling he probably didn't want to be a part of that situation. He wanted to open things up to trade and all of that, but still have good enough control that you don't have them walking all over you. You don't have them taking advantage of you like they take advantage of every country. We have extremely strong warriors. We can fight against you if we need to. But we don't want it to come to that. We want to open up trade to the world government, to the rest of the world. And they're like, no, we need more. It's not good enough just to have trade and just to have resources and all of that. We want your strongest people. We want you to serve. We want you to, kneel before us. And that was probably a lot too much for him to agree upon. And that's likely why they just straight up killed him. And they're like, okay, if you don't agree to all of this, we'll cause chaos, we'll pin it on your son, and we'll, kill you and just stop Elbaf from being the way you envision it. And of course, that didn't necessarily work out. It looks like they still hold strong to Harald's ideals and what he wanted, because after he's killed, it's clear that the kids are being grown up or being raised with his mentality in mind. It's clear that even one of the oldest warriors is still saying things that Harald wanted. Like, he seems to be cool with Elbaf being a country of peace, and I don't think he would be that way if he knew that Harald was a bad guy. And I don't think anybody would be that way if they ever felt that he was. So I don't think all of the ideas where, like, oh, he sold out his country, or he's making his country weak, or he's, slowly dismantling the country from the inside by making them more vulnerable, I don't think any of that is true. But I will leave that here, and you guys can tell me what you think in the comments, and leave a like, hit the subscribe if you like, and I'll see everybody at some point in the future, hopefully, if I do another theory. It might be few and far between. It might be another one more recent or more sooner than this one. It's been almost like a year, I think, since I uploaded something, but I have been busy. So yeah, I'll see everybody later.